I'm delighted to invite Chloe Edwards to present on the fantastic work she's been leading, and for anyone who's been involved in the local nature recovery strategy process, how incredibly complicated and involved it is. And yeah, I've been playing a very small part on the Oxfordshire one, and yeah, it's been fantastic working with Chloe on this, and she's about to tell you about the broader process.
What shall I do with this? Stick it on somewhere?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Just work out how all of this does. Okay, great. So hi everybody, my name's Chloe and I work at Oxfordshire County Council, and my role is to prepare a local nature recovery strategy, or LNRS, for Oxfordshire County Council. And we've been using SCP, and we've been greatly supported by Bob in order to do that. So I'm going to try and talk to you today about what the LNRS is and how we've made, in particular, the local habitat map for Oxfordshire. So, government asked authorities in England to create local nature recovery strategies, or these LNRSs, and there are two key elements that make up the strategy. One is called the local habitat map, that should look like a prioritised set of land in that area to focus nature recovery efforts towards, and the other is called a statement of biodiversity priorities. That is a list of priorities to achieve, so like outcomes to achieve, with actions next to those outcomes. So you could achieve this outcome by doing this thing, and it lists the important things to do for habitats and for species. So the main purpose of the strategy is to identify locations to create or improve habitat, which is most likely to provide greatest benefits for both nature and the wider environment. And the strategies don't force owners or managers of land to make those changes, but instead the goal is that these maps here should incentivise action through funding and investment opportunities to certain areas, certain actions, certain species. So there's 48 of us all doing this at the moment. 2 have already completed and are available online if you want to have a look at them. And we're there for Oxfordshire. And we've got 260 hectares to play with in order to better map out opportunities for nature recovery. We're building on a lot of existing work to do that. There's plenty of things that have happened in the past, and we've built that in. So effectively, the question that we felt we were being asked was, if our finances were limited, which they are, where would those resources need to be targeted to create a bigger, better, more joined up, I've done the thing Bob hates here. I did it on purpose, obviously, network for nature. And we are taking a partnership approach. So to make these decisions about those areas, those priorities, those species, then we're working with all these different partners. So it's district council, city council, we are the county council sitting on top of that, but doing different things. And then we have Environmental Records Centre. We're led by information from Natural England and DEFRA. Then we've got the land use organisations, particularly focused on farming and rural businesses. So the CLA, the NFU. We've got Oxlep representing enterprises and business, community action groups. So I'm trying to coordinate everybody to get to agree on what we need to do. And it's not my role to make the decisions, it's my role to bring these people together to make those decisions. And Oxfordshire is split into these different authority areas with the city in the centre. So our first step has been to try and better understand the area in terms of spatial information. So producing maps to understand where the opportunities are to create or improve habitats in the county. And what we want to do with that information is put it into Marksan and then ask Marksan to figure out the easiest way, the most efficient way to achieve targets. So over here we've got examples of parkland and wood pasture in the county, with then areas around that where we could buffer and create new habitats. Here you can just about see the areas available for us to create heathland, so really, really restricted in our part of the country. And so if we want to make sure that those are included, we really need to ensure that is in our overall network. But for things like pond creation, it's a lot more flexible. We don't have to be as focused on locations. We can do it in a lot of areas. Similarly, for chalk streams and chalk rivers, those are an important part of habitats in the county and in the country, and we've got some that we are able to focus work towards there. But they're, again, quite a restricted piece of the puzzle. So we used 5-hectare planning units, if anyone's interested in that level of detail. And I'm just another slide here to show you that restricted range of certain types of conservation features like heathland, and then some of that much more widespread opportunity area for things like ponds. After we built in those opportunities and understood those spatial levels of information, we had a lot more maps than I can fit on one screen. We then needed to consider constraints. So where are the places that we can't create landscape scale habitat? And that's probably people's houses and car parks. So that's what we cut out here. Any large areas of impermeable surface. And that has caught up quite a lot of residential gardens, but it hasn't taken out green infrastructure or urban green spaces and rivers and things like that. So they're still available. But what that blocking out did meant we wouldn't be choosing people's homes and supermarkets for suggesting woodland creation on. There was one more thing that was quite a key consideration for Oxfordshire. The land use in Oxfordshire, more than 70% of the land is used for agriculture. And the areas shown up on the map here are what are called grades 1 and 2. And those are some of the highest quality land for producing food. So grades 1 are shown up in red a little bit there, but they're very, very few and far apart. And then grade 2 is a slightly larger band, but they're still really high level, versatile, and some of the best land for producing food. So what we did with that is we set a sort of disincentive, and we incurred a bigger cost if Marxan and the software chose those locations for creating habitat in. I've got to be a little bit careful here because it doesn't mean farmers can't do positive things. That still needs to happen. But the type of actions we were mapping were things like woodland creation, wetland creation, and we didn't want to map that onto farmland. But they still need to be taking actions and to be supported to take actions like improving and gapping up hedgerows, creating wildflower and arable buffer strips and things like that. So that's what we tried to do there. We disincentivized creation of habitats unless necessary for strategic purposes or to buffer particularly rare sites. They were still included in those cases. And we also tried as best as possible to speak with local people and organisations to understand if they already wanted to do something for nature recovery or were already doing something. It's impossible to get everybody in the county. But we did try and go as wide as possible. We spoke to about 1,000 people in the early part of our progress. And that was workshops and surveys. And we asked people to tell us where they were already doing things or would like to do things for biodiversity. And those are all the areas of the county. And I was actually quite surprised at the extent of cover that we did get back. So what we did in those areas is we had a spatial understanding of willingness for support. And we used Marxan to set incentives so that the software was more likely to choose those areas than the blank areas. Again, if they weren't appropriate, they wouldn't be chosen. It wasn't a compulsory thing. So luckily, the software meant I didn't have to deal with this at a county level. So the opportunities, constraints, penalties, and the incentives all overlap. And whilst that helps us to understand which areas offer the greatest combined benefits, it's almost impossible to handle at a county level with it looking like that for a human, but this is where the software did such a great job. So we asked it to achieve a certain amount of different types of habitat creation, habitat enhancement actions, and a certain amount of area. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. The other thing that we did do in our consultation point was ask people what was important to them, and this is a key part of being able to build in that democratic ambition, local-led process. So key things that I took away from this one, well, the whole lot, but the connectivity of habitats via the waterways became particularly important. That ranked as a top priority, a top outcome for people to see happen in the county repeatedly. Fresh water quality as well as river health were really important in Oxfordshire. Again, similarly, you see another theme around corridors that need to connect key areas coming up, and somebody's ambition to be able to walk across the county without any barriers, which was really nice as well. So this has helped keep us in check as we go through the process. So ultimately, all those partners I showed you a picture of earlier, we corralled and encouraged them to help create targets. So all of the targets were for conservation features, and a conservation feature can be anything that you want to enhance or create and that you've got spatial data for. So for example, the existing woodland in the county. We have 16,500 hectares in Oxfordshire, and what we said is we want at least 40% of that in our final map. Similarly, for pond opportunities, this was that large blue area, so it was really quite flexible across the county. So we set a lower target because we were less constrained. We said for pond opportunities, make sure you have at least 5%. But what you can see in these cases is that where we said 40% of woodland and 5% of ponds, the actual outcome was that we got nearly 70% of the available woodland and 35% of ponds. So that's 32,000 hectares where people could create ponds, 11,000 hectares of existing woodland mapped for enhancement actions. Some of our features are much more constrained, so our existing chalk rivers and streams and a buffer area totals 650 hectares, and we set a much higher target. That was felt to be a significantly more important feature for the county to make sure that we had enhancement work directed towards. So we set it at nearly 90%, and we got nearly 90%. But the higher you set the targets, the less it typically overshoots by, because it's working harder to make sure it meets those. This is some of the targets we set, but there was like 2 pages of this, and I can provide the methodology for anyone who wants it. So once we pressed go, we still had work to do. That isn't the end of it. We looked at what our first outcome was like, and we got a cover of 23% of the county. And those are the areas where we could create or enhance habitats to achieve the targets that we set. We felt that didn't represent the level of ambition that people wanted across the area, so we increased the percentage by setting higher targets, and we got more area covered. But it was quite scattered, and it wasn't really as coherent as we liked. So what we did is we set a higher cost for having a big lots of boundaries. Bob will be able to explain that better than me. And so it grouped things together, and that's what we wanted, more key areas grouped together, not as much scattered focus areas. So we did get that, but this is where we lost our connections along rivers and watercourses by doing that. So what we did is instead we built in a feature that was compulsory. So we tied it to the WFD rivers and watercourses. So that meant that 100% of those rivers and watercourses had to be included in our final map. And that really brought a lot of our focused areas, these purple and blue areas, into connection along those corridors. So now we've got 35-ish% cover, including 6.5% of designated sites, so things like SSIs, local wildlife sites, irreplaceable habitats. And we had a few gaps to fill, but that we were happy with as a draft version. So what we did, we felt we had answered our initial question with a draft to say where should we target those limited resources to create this network for nature in the county. And we put it onto a web map that people could use and interact with. So any of those green or orange areas had a allocated action to either create new habitat or enhance existing ones. You could click anywhere on that area and it would pop up and tell you what action was relevant there. So this is how that looks. I've zoomed right into the green area here, and this is what's under there. This is part of the network, and I've clicked and it says undertake sensitive management and restoration of ponds and pond complexes. So you can see that despite it being a really broad network across a large area, it can still pick out really key small targeted features, and that's what I found really powerful about this approach. So yes, across here it will say enhance rivers on a broader scale, but it can pick out those really key defined features if you ask it to. Is that what I was going to say here? I think so. So yes, there are stacked options that you can have. So whilst we've got that option to enhance the pond, there's one of 4 actions that can be taken there. So if you click the little arrow on the side, it will then say you can also create wetland habitats, you could enhance the structural diversity of the river, and that gives landowners options of what they can do to achieve priorities in the area. Last step, asking people what they thought. So we had a solution from that draft, and it was a quick way to produce an efficient solution. It really was very helpful. And what we felt we needed to do is then take that to people and invite them to help us fine-tune and shape the boundaries and the actions that we've mapped. So we did hold a consultation. We got about 2,000 responses, lots of positive support for it, and lots of suggestions for fine-tuning. So that's now what we're working through. And you can see all the comments here that I am now dealing with. But it is really positive. It means people really got engaged in the process, and that will give us a stronger strategy later when we say this is important and people agree, and we can evidence that people have been engaged during the process. So in future, would I use it again? Yes, I think it'll be even quicker now that we've set some of those targets, those features. We've got groups that can start this agreement and people have started to understand the process at a local level. You do need good environmental data from your record centres, and we were really lucky that we're in that position. We've got a great record centre. So now that we've shown people what it can do, we also hope that some groups might be more forthcoming with their spatial data in the future. So farm clusters, particularly of interest for us, and any kind of landscape recovery projects people are working on, they can submit that to us to help us improve the fine-tuning of our mapping in the future. So that could also include local parish maps where people have already surveyed areas and done assessments on the ground, and that could make this even more powerful than it has already been for us. So this should be now guiding decisions made in Oxfordshire, and planners have to have regard to these documents as they make decisions about land use in the county. So thanks, Bob. Appreciate the help. And that's it from me. Thank you.